everybody, and welcome back. Thanks for tuning in to another episode here in the series. My name is Dominic. I'm the host of the Android Factory. This episode is going to conclude our series here where we've gone ahead and built out this entire application where we've fetched some data from a remote API. We have a little bit of an adding to a cart functionality, can change some quantity, could potentially do something for the checkout, and then we do have a sign-in page here, some kind of profile and all that kind of stuff. The app isn't 100% complete, but I think for what I set out for in the beginning of this series, we have some swipe to delete there too. I think we've made some pretty significant strides here. And so today we're going to talk about this explore page, which is a pretty powerful demonstration of our architectural pattern here, the MVI, this Redux style here. We see all of our UI reacting here. We have a nice little animation as the user clicks around. You can kind of scroll through and change different quantities, and all this information kind of just changes based upon, what item has been selected here. So this is a pretty interesting page. I had a lot of fun building it out here. As you can see, there's a little bit of code here, and so we're just gonna walk through it and see how this whole thing came together and just how simple it is to build. In all honesty, a beautiful looking screen here. So grab some popcorn, smash that like button. If you are brand new, consider subscribing as well so you don't miss out. And let's go ahead and just dive right into it here as we talk about this screen. So first of all, let's break this screen down, right? What is it for anyone who has not been following along? As I demoed it down here, on this tab, there's a whole list of products. We get these 20 products back from an API. They all have different information associated with them. There's a price, there's a rating out of 5 stars, description, etc., right? All this information that comes to us via the API. And this page here is kind of comprised of, one single page to kind of browse through the different ones and actually, look at each individual product here in a little bit more of like a detailed fashion. We see here a lot of this UI is changing as well. It's even dynamic with different colors here, extracting the dominant colors and the colors from the image that we're actually loading and using that to actually fuel this little card and then this background view here as well. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff here. Sorry if the pictures and the colors don't really match all that well. I'm doing my best with what was provided to me, but you definitely get the concept here. You can see how pretty interesting and powerful this little design is. So let's break this screen down and then let's talk about it a little more. So here we have a header image. We have a main header image. We notice that the entire screen scrolls, something to note, but we have a main header image that kind of reacts to basically what element is selected. We then have a carousel of all of our different products, and we have a little bit of an additional treatment here. We see that darker purple versus a lighter purple here. Border to denote which one is selected. There's even a little animation here for when they get selected. Pretty nice stuff. And then underneath here, we have this whole bottom section that reacts to basically, the data of which one is selected. So we'll see here we have a cotton jacket. We flip over to here, we have a backpack, this Fjallraven kind of thing. Again, all of our, our quantity bar updates to whatever the user selected, the rating out of 5 and that kind of information. So everything here seems to be reacting to whatever we have selected, again, completely in a scrollable list. And then we even have an option to add these things to the cart. So we can go ahead and add this to the cart. We see the button updates now remove from cart, and we see this little icon down here for the one, we added something to our cart. Note here we have quantity 6. And if we click over to our cart here, we'll see we have quantity 6. And if we go ahead and change this around to quantity 2 and bounce back, we see that our UI reacts accordingly, right? We now see that there's only quantity 2. We can change it from here, and then we go back here, and now we have 20 of them. So this whole application is just living, breathing. Everything is kind of connected here, and it's really, really wonderful. It's the power of the MVI structure here. So this is all cool. I'm hopeful that this is pretty interesting and a pretty nice UI here that we've built out. I think it looks pretty good. Definitely throw some comments down below if you like the way this screen looks. If you're interested in any of these interactions, we're obviously going to dive into it, but I'd love to get some feedback here. I make the content for you guys, might as well hear it from, some feedback from you guys. And don't worry, all the code is available on GitHub here. You can find the link in the description so you can see this firsthand for yourself. But speaking of code, let's go ahead and dive right into it here. So if we see here, this entire snippet that I've just highlighted is the entire code. That's all of it. This is our entire Fragment implementation. It is less than 30 lines of code, and it is just clean and beautiful here. So give me some props for this one. I'm very happy that this came out. But realistically here, we have our Android entry point, the Explore fragment, just because we're making use of Hilt. We have a fragment here, a class that extends our fragment. We provide our layout, nothing too special there. We got a little bit of binding information. We have our Explore view model, pretty standard practices here as far as architecture goes and whatnot. Again, in that on destroy view, we obviously are going to null out our binding. Pretty simple stuff, pretty standard things if we're not using compose, which hint, hint, we're going to jump into in this channel pretty soon. And then here we basically have the guts of our screen right here. This, 10 lines of code or so is really everything. So first thing to note here is we have an Explore Fragment Actions. And this is kind of just an interface to bridge the gap between our UI layer and our data layer here. We'll jump into that in a little bit. We have our Epoxy controller, which takes, the actions as part of the constructor there so that we have some way to connect the UI to the data layer. If you're not familiar with Epoxy, go ahead and check it out on the rest of the channel. It's basically a fancy wrapper around recycler view and made this entire screen, including this horizontal carousel, very easy to implement, and we will dive into that very shortly. Very straightforward. We're setting our controller, and then here is our goodies, right? We have a view model. A view model has a UI view state. That is a state flow of our Explore Fragment view state, which we'll dive into next. We then take as live data, distinct until change. We observe it with our view lifecycle owner. Of course, we want to be lifecycle aware. We're professional Android devs here. And then we just basically push that view state into our Epoxy controller, and this whole screen is then run through Epoxy. So we see here a very simple layer, a very simple, fragment here, and it really puts the emphasis on the data layer and the UI layer. In this case, we use Epoxy, but we can probably very easily swap that out for Compose at some point in the future, to just go ahead and, stay up to date with practices. But again, we care more about our data layer at this point because that's really where the guts of the application is. So let's go ahead and talk about this view state. I talked about it a little bit here that this view model contains. If we take a look at our class here, we've implemented a view state as a sealed class, right? And so we don't really have too much going on for loading and error states, but it's always good practice, to handle these different states. But the idea is we have our view state and we have different representations of, the state that our view can be in, right? So we have a loading state, we have an error state, and then we have a success state. All of these extend our Explore Fragment view state, and they have different information, right? So the loading doesn't really have anything. Our error case has an error message, and then our success case here has a selected UI product, which is a of type UI product. It has a quantity here, to basically denote this information here. And then we also have the all UI products, which is this entire list here. And so between these three simple pieces of information, we have all the info that we need to actually build this screen here. So as we can take a look in our fragment, we basically observe changes to that state and we just push it into our Epoxy controller. So let's go ahead and jump into there next. So we have our Epoxy controller. We take in the Explore Fragment actions. Maybe let's bounce here real quick because it should be pretty straightforward. So the actions here takes in a view model because we need to somehow connect, to our data layer. And we just have a few functions here. So we have an on product selected, we have an on quantity changed, we have on add to cart, and all of those things, if you see here on product selected, that's what happens when I click one of these different items, right? We're selecting a product, okay? On quantity changed is, as we're sliding this bar around left and right here, we're changing the quantity, and once we kind of let go of that drag, we then call on quantity changed. Okay, cool, that's another interaction. And then on add to cart here. Well, on add to cart is kind of two-faced because it can both add an element to the cart and remove something from the cart. This function here is smart enough to know, cool, should I be adding it or should I be removing it from the cart? And as you see here, this little icon 1 versus 2 is kind of oscillating as we're adding and removing this element from the cart. So when you look at this actual screen, the few user interactions we have here are them being able to select an actual product like we're doing right now, changing the quantity, and adding and removing to the cart. And so that all of those actions are defined in this Explore Fragment actions. It has a hook into our view model, and basically this works in tandem with our Epoxy controller to make all these user interactions happen, handle them, modify our data generates a new state, that state gets pushed down into Epoxy, and our screen updates. Very, very nice, very, very professional, very, very Compose-like, if I do say so myself. So if you know Epoxy, if you've been with me before, there's only one function that we need to override here, right? We have a build models function, and that provides to us our Explore Fragment view state because we've declared this Epoxy controller as a typed epoxy controller with our view state as the type, right? So then we can very easily say when our data is either loading, do the loading. When it's in an error, set up our error. When it's in a success, set up our success. A couple of those functions are here. I decided to not implement them because I cared about the happy case. And here in our setup success state, we go ahead and actually put all this stuff on the screen here. So if you end up pulling the code, feel free to implement the loading and the error state and triggering that so that you can see it. But here we can just very easily run this code, this function linearly, and we'll see how our UI comes together. So we see we have a header image epoxy model where we pass in our selected products image. We give it an ID, we add it to the controller, lovely. We then go ahead and basically map all of our UI products here into circle image epoxy models, and that's exactly what this carousel here is, right? And then we basically have a list of all of these epoxy models. Epoxy affords us a wonderful carousel model where we can go ahead and pass in the list of models inside of some predetermined, pre-built functionality that they have. Give it an ID, add it to the controller, and that's how we get this guy right here. Really lovely stuff. And then we broke down even this, bottom section, this detail screen that kind of looks like it could be all one thing. We broke this down as well. So we have a product header description. We then have a product footer. And we went ahead and just, populated the corresponding information that we needed, added, the different callbacks and such that we needed to the footers to basically allow for this interaction and this interaction of adding and removing to the cart. And all of that stuff is encapsulated in a few different views here. So we really have a header view, a horizontal view, a little description, and then a footer here. And that corresponds to, this header view right here, this horizontal row right here. The description header, I believe, is just this little bit here. Maybe it actually includes the black text here. That's kind of the details. And then the footer here is just these different bars and button and kind of stuff. But we're using epoxy, we're using the power of recycler views. It looks like one cohesive screen. It looks like one bit of functionality, but realistically, it's in a couple different, views. So I just want to touch on these views really quickly before we dive into the data layer here, just to show you how everything's going. The views are pretty straightforward here. The header image view is actually the most interesting because of that palette library that we've imported and that we've worked with. As we see here, the background and some of these colors are changing as we are selecting different elements here, and that is done through this palette library that we went ahead and implemented here. So it's really, really cool. Let's walk through it real quick. All of this is just loading this image, right? The only thing that matters inside of this epoxy controller, this epoxy model, is the fact that there's an image view, right? This is the whole model here. We can see how that, gets translated here. And so all we're doing here in this image header model is just loading this, this view, specifically this image URL that's passed in. So every time we select a different element here, we're passing in a different image URL to this one. It ends up creating via coil a couple of requests here to actually, or one request to actually fetch that data. And basically what we end up doing is, let's see, call this dot target, and we're basically able to fetch this drawable result here as part of the downloading process. So instead of telling an image view, hey, load, coil, load this image into the image view, we're actually loading it into memory here first that we can kind of, grab onto so that we can use this information, get the bitmap from it, use our palette.builder with the bitmap, and then we can see here, we can actually pull that out. So calling builder.generate, get muted color, get dark muted color, and setting that as the different, colors here on these different views allows us to dynamically change this content here based upon the image that's loaded and what we kind of pull out of it. I think this one, maybe this one? No, this one. I think this one looks kind of the best because it's most in line with the purple that we have here, in our application theme. But regardless, you can see how all this kind of stuff changes based upon the image that we've downloaded. All this other stuff in here is just basically the plumbing that we need to do it. We have an image loader here that we've created with coil. We enqueue a request. Our request does everything here. And then obviously we want to just clean up our resources in the event that we're unbinding. So we have some disposing, of those resources that we're using. If we take a look at our circle image epoxy model, I think that's where I was right here. Again, we can see that we basically pass in the minimum information that we need, right? We have an image URL, we have a Boolean to say if it is selected or not, we have a lambda to say when this thing has been clicked, and all we do here is just set up our view accordingly, right? This one is not selected right here, none of these are, but the second that we click that, we see that it is selected now, and that is fueled by this little bit of logic. So we have our stroke color. We say if you are selected, we're going to get the dark purple, otherwise we're going to get the light purple, and that's how this, that's how that interaction works, right? That's how we actually notify the user that, hey, this is the one that's selected. We're doing it with a very simple, if-else check. We're simply loading an image into this circle view here, and in this case, nothing too fancy there. And then we just have an animation that we run here if this model is the one that is selected. So as we click on this, you can see here that it does kind of do this little bounce animation. And that's very simply, if it is selected, we're just going to animate between 1, 0.85, 1.05, and 1. And we're just animating the scale of the X and the Y of this entire view. And that gives it, over the course of 250 milliseconds, so a quarter of a second, that gives it that little appeal that it is just like, bouncing and basically reacting to the user's, touch, which is really, really nice. It's a wonderful little touch here. And really, that's just a handful of lines of code right here. Nothing too crazy. Again, all this code in GitHub. Definitely go check it out. We just have some equals and hash code to help the epoxy diffing along the way. Nothing too fancy, nothing that we haven't covered before. So if you're confused, go ahead and check out some of the other episodes on the channel here and you'll be caught up to speed. So we use the carousel model to add all the epoxy models in there for these circle views. We have our product description header. That's just putting some text on the screen here. That's nothing fancy. That's just this section right here. And then our last one is our product footer epoxy model, which is a little bit more interesting. So we're going to go ahead and look at the design of this. Let's go this way. Yeah, we can see what the footer entails here, right? It's this bottom section right here. Nothing too fancy. If we take a look at it, we have a progress indicator at the very top that we make use of to basically denote like the rating of it. Let's see, we have a seek bar and then we have a button here. So really just a couple UI elements, couple text views, and everything kind of comes together here. The actual implementation of it isn't anything too crazy here. We're coming up with a way to formulate the progress. We're coming up with a string interpolation to actually get this 2.1/5 on screen. And then we're doing a little bit of seek bar work here. We're going to go ahead and just listen for the various different things that happen here. So as the progress is changing, we update our text view here to say quantity.theprocess, and then on stop tracking touch is when they've actually just like let go, right? So as I'm doing all of this, the quantity is changing, we can see it updating, but the on stop tracking touch has not run yet. Once I stop and now we move away and we we pick our thumb up from the screen, then our on stop tracking touch happens. We then call our on quantity update with the progress. So we're doing a little bit of internal manipulation here, right? We're changing the text as they're doing this, and then we don't notify our store until they stop that, until they let go of the seek bar there. Some very simple logic here to ask if that product is in the cart. We can go ahead and say remove from cart, otherwise add to cart. We apply that text to the button, and then we set an on-click listener for this button here. And so we can see that working here. Very simple stuff. I mean, it might look complicated, but when you see it under the hood, when it's laid out like this, it really is quite simple. You just gotta see it once, you just gotta think about it all the way through, and when you can go ahead and like compartmentalize each section of the screen into their own, epoxy model or view holder, whatever you're familiar with, it really becomes quite simple to implement here. So hopefully this little walkthrough here of the UI layer has been helpful. If it has, if you really enjoyed this, I'd really appreciate a like. I'd really appreciate commenting down below. Let me know what I'm doing well for you here. All that stuff is of course important to me here. So that's basically all of our UI layer. That is the entire epoxy that we walked through, and yeah, that's our controller, which is used at our fragment level. We don't really do much else here. I think the only thing left to talk about is our view model. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So if you've been watching this whole season, you understand that we've been following this MVI, this Redux-like pattern here, where we basically have a store and we have something called an application state, right? And so this is just a data class, and it provides a whole bunch of information about the state of our application, right? So the favorite product IDs, the expanded ones, which ones are in the cart, which ones aren't, a quantities map as far as, okay, this product has quantity 16, now it has quantity 5, and, this one only has 1. We have one other piece of information that I added here for this page, and it's called the Explore page metadata. It's right here. It's very simple. It's just the selected product ID, right? We have all of our products here in our store, so we don't necessarily need to duplicate the data. We just need to know which one is selected, right? And so, here this ID is selected, here this ID is selected, here this ID is selected, and obviously we, kind of react to those different actions here. So we have our store. We have a few helper classes along the way to basically update, when something's in the cart or when the quantity gets changed. And then a UI product list reducer, which will just do a little bit of mapping from the store to turn our products into UI products. Which very quickly looking at that data class, we have, the product, which is our root model. And then the UI product is the one that says, is it favorited? Is it expanded? Is it in the cart? And a lot of that, has to do with maybe this main screen, right? So this one is favorited. This one isn't favorited. These two are in the cart. And in this case, it is expanded, or it's not expanded, right? So a lot of this metadata is kind of, relevant for the UI. And that's why we've kind of preface this data class with UI product, which contains a product and a whole bunch of other metadata here. So if we take a look at our Explore page, we don't have a heart here to denote the favorite status, but because we're working with UI products, we can very easily just add that in, right? We will know in this header model, we could very easily add a little heart icon up here. And if it is if it is favorited, then we know to color the heart in, otherwise we don't color it in. So it's very easy, very flexible to work with here, what we've built out so far. And so basically inside of our view model, we have the UI product list flow. So again, this is just reducing down the UI products from the store. We have a cart quantities flow. This is just a map from integer to integer, mapping product IDs to the quantity that they have, that kind of stuff. And then a selected product ID flow, which we just get from the Explore page metadata selected product ID, right? So as we're clicking around here, this flow is being updated with all these different IDs that, are correlating to these products. And when we receive an update here, that triggers this UI state to change. And why does it change? It changes because of this flow combine, helper that we're using, where we basically combine these 3 different flows that we've defined up here. And then we have this block right here that will allow us to combine the data that we got from all 3 of those flows into one flow. So as we see here, the UI view state is a state flow of Explore Fragment view state. And it is a combination of basically these 3 flows, right? So it's really, really powerful. Flow is super amazing. It's an amazing tool to use here, especially for this view state kind of concept. So nothing else here as far as the UI product list or the cart quantity flow, none of that is changing as we click around here. The one thing that is changing is our selected product ID flow, right? Because that gets updated every time we select a new element here. And so the flow rebuilds, and so then we generate a new state. We push that state into the Epoxy controller, and that causes this image to change. That causes all of this data down here to change. And be relevant for this product, right, that the user has selected. So hopefully you can see how that kind of works. And the magic is right here. So we can loop through our UI products. We can find the product where the product's ID matches the selected product ID. We do a little bit of error handling here as far as if our products are empty or if the selected product is null. Both of these things should not happen if our network request succeeded, and there's no way for the user to select a product that doesn't exist in this list, so we should always be finding something, right? Really, really simple. And then otherwise we create our success state here, right? We have our selected product. We can find exactly what the quantity is for this particular product by looking it up in the map based on its ID. Of course, when we're working with maps, you guys all know that it is a nullable operation, so we just default to 1 in the event that we can't find the product quantity in the map, because I believe if there's not something explicitly stated in the map, Like if there's not a quantity for this product, the entry is not going to exist in the map. So we just want to default it to 1 so that our UI reacts accordingly, because that's a reasonable default for us, right? Then we have a little bit of a state in here, so we can just, kind of boilerplate stuff to ensure that we can have a state flow here. It's attached to our view model scope. We have our sharing started while subscribed. We give it an initial state here. And I believe the while subscribed is just that it will emit, let's see, sharing is started when the first subscriber appears immediately and stops when the last one disappears. Yep, so basically just, not doing any extra work whether we have or do not have subscribers to this flow here. And here is the magic that we have for the on product selected. So as the user selects a particular product, eventually this gets called. Let's go ahead and trace this out real quick. Now this gets called inside of our explore fragment actions, and that gets called right here. But realistically, the on product selected gets called from within. Now we're within our controller, within our circle image epoxy model. So for every product that we have here, we're converting them into the image model. So that's all of these here. And we have an on-click lambda that we pass in to this exact epoxy model. Now, when that is clicked, we call actions.onProductSelected, and we pass in the current product's ID. So each one of these models has a listener that says, hey, when I'm clicked, invoke this code. That code in this case is onProductSelected. That is defined in our actions. Our actions has access to our view model. And so our actions then say, cool, viewModel.onProductSelected. So it's basically just a pass-through method with a little bit of separation of concerns, right? We don't need to have our epoxy models modifying our view model or calling functions on our view model. It doesn't need to have that visibility, right? So we put that actions layer in between to stay consistent and stay professional with it. And very simply here, when this gets called, we launch off a coroutine to update the store, and this is what we do, right? So we have our current application state, and we say we're going to return a new application state.copy. We're going to go ahead and take the explore page metadata, and whatever it is, we're going to copy it, and then we're going to say, hey, the selected product ID is now this product ID that was passed in, right? And so now this function here updates our store, right, with, hey, now there's a new piece of information in the selected product ID. Our selected product ID flow here maps down the entire store into the explore page metadata.selected product ID. So this flow receives an update, which then is attached here to our combine right here for our view state, and then we just go ahead and regenerate and rebuild our screen. So as this selected product ID flow changes, we see that impacts what is the ID here with our selected product ID, which therefore means that the selected product is going to change, right, that we end up finding in our list, and that then gets pushed into our success state and then eventually pushed into epoxy, and everything else is history, right? We just know, okay, we know which product to put up here, right? We know which ID to put up here. We know which ID to look up for the quantity. We know which ID to look up to see is that in the cart or not. Now it is, and now it's not, right? So really, really simple interactions here that all come together to be greater than the sum of their individual parts. So this is a really, really powerful example of how this idea of a store, this MVI, this Redux pattern is super, super flexible. It's really, really interesting. It's really fun to build out, because once you have these little building blocks here, right, of these little flows that you care for, or maybe we want to add a fourth or a fifth or however many flows that we want to combine and basically react to any of their changes, we could very easily do so here, with our flow combine. We generate a new state, we spit it out, and we do something with that state in the UI layer. And so that's really about it. There's a few functions here, a few helper classes here to update when something's in the cart and something, the quantity changes and whatnot, but that's all a very similar thing. Let me see here. So yeah, we've covered this in a previous episode, but basically we end up calling update. There's a product ID and there's a current state. This returns a new state. And so all it does is look inside of our in-cart product IDs. If it doesn't exist, it adds it in. If it does exist, it removes it from there, and that's how we get the toggling nature of an element being in the cart versus not in the cart. So when we click it, we kind of understand how how this screen should react and whatnot. But again, we've covered that in a previous episode, so if that's a little confusing, I don't want to dive into it right now because that's not the focus of the video, but we have covered it before. I definitely encourage you to watch some of the earlier videos if this UI, if this whole application is of interest to you. We really dove through a lot here. But that's basically about it, for me, folks. If you made it this far in the video, please comment down below, real fan, to let me know that you cared about this video and you were interested in how Redux can be used. I think this is an unbelievable example of it. Again, all of the code is listed on GitHub. You can just download it, see it happen in real time, put some breakpoints, understand how everything's happening, tweak it if you want, break it. That's honestly the best way to learn sometimes, is just mess things up, and you can always revert it back from GitHub and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, to see this entire class implemented in less than 30 lines of code here, the whole screen here is a fragment that's pretty small, is pretty powerful here. This is a fantastic resource without me patting myself on the back too much. But anyway, thank you guys for sticking with me. Compose is on the horizon here as we look to do something a little bit different on this channel. I'm very excited to bring the next tutorial forward with you guys. I think you're going to enjoy it. Compose is the way of the future. It's pretty cool from what I've seen so far, so I'm excited to dive into it. Again, smash that like button if you made it this far. Subscribe if you are brand new. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.